Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Today we're going to delve into a deeply somber and pivotal chapter of American history, one that is often glossed over but is crucial to understanding the nation's past: the Trail of Tears. This isn't just a historical event, it's a profound human tragedy, a story of loss, resilience, and the devastating consequences of unchecked power. Imagine a thriving civilization, rich in culture, governance, and tradition, living for centuries on the land they called home. This was the reality for the Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole nations, often referred to as the 5 civilized tribes. They weren't nomadic wanderers, as some stereotypes might suggest. In the early 19th century, they had adopted many aspects of American culture, including written languages, constitutional governments, settled agriculture, and even Western-style education. The Cherokee, for example, had their own newspaper, the Cherokee Phoenix, printed in both English and their own syllabary, developed by the brilliant Sequoyah. They had farms, businesses, and a society that was, by many measures, as civilized as their white neighbors. They believed they could coexist, that they could adapt and secure their future in their ancestral lands in the southeastern United States, what we now know as Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, and Florida. But this vision of coexistence was shattered by a relentless hunger for land and resources. The rapid expansion of cotton plantations in the South, fueled by the invention of the cotton gin, created an insatiable demand for new territory. The land occupied by the 5 tribes was fertile and strategically located, and a powerful political movement arose demanding their removal. This wasn't just a fringe idea, it became a central policy of the United States government. The argument was simple and brutal. The land was more valuable in the hands of white settlers, and Native Americans were seen as an obstacle to progress and prosperity. In 1830, this sentiment was codified into law with the passage of the Indian Removal Act, championed by President Andrew Jackson. On its face, the act authorized the president to negotiate treaties for the voluntary exchange of native lands in the southeast for lands west of the Mississippi River. The key word there is voluntary. But the reality was anything but. The act unleashed a wave of harassment, fraud, and violence against the tribes. State governments, particularly Georgia, began imposing their laws on sovereign tribal lands, nullifying their governments, and seizing their property. Treaties were often negotiated with unauthorized minority factions within the tribes who signed away the rights of the majority without their consent. The Cherokee Nation refused to yield. They chose a path of legal resistance, taking their case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And remarkably, they won. In the 1832 case of Worcester v. Georgia, Chief Justice John Marshall ruled in favor of the Cherokee, affirming their sovereignty and declaring that Georgia's laws had no force within their territory. It was a landmark legal victory, but it was a hollow one. President Jackson famously, and perhaps apocryphally, was said to have defied the court, remarking, "John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it." The federal government refused to uphold the Supreme Court's ruling, leaving the Cherokee and other tribes defenseless against the encroaching states. With legal avenues exhausted and military force looming, the fate of the tribes was sealed. Despite the majority of the Cherokee people, led by Principal Chief John Ross, opposing removal, a small, unauthorized group signed the Treaty of New Echota in 1835. This treaty, which was never approved by the Cherokee National Council, sold all their remaining lands to the United States for $5 million and land in what was called Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma. The U.S. Senate ratified it by a single vote, and it became the legal justification for the forced removal. What followed in the spring and summer of 1838 was a military operation of brutal efficiency. About 7,000 soldiers, under the command of General Winfield Scott, descended upon the Cherokee Nation. Families were forced from their homes at bayonet point with little more than the clothes on their backs. They were herded into squalid, disease-ridden stockades and internment camps to await their forced march west. Eyewitnesses, including some of the soldiers themselves, described scenes of heart-wrenching cruelty. Homes were looted and burned the moment their owners were driven out. The elderly, the sick, and young children were given no special consideration. The bonds of family and community, cultivated over generations, were torn apart in an instant. The journey itself, which took place throughout the fall and winter of 1838 and 1839, is what we now call the Trail of Tears. It was a march of over 1,000 miles, much of it on foot, through brutal winter conditions. The people faced freezing temperatures, inadequate food, and rampant disease. Cholera, dysentery, and starvation were constant companions. It's estimated that over 4,000 of the 16,000 Cherokee who were removed died during their capture, imprisonment, or on the journey itself. That's 1 in every 4 people. Think about that. 1/4 of an entire nation wiped out in a matter of months. And the Cherokee were not alone. The Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole peoples endured their own horrific journeys, suffering thousands of casualties. The Choctaw removal was one of the first, and a Choctaw leader described their journey as a trail of tears and death, giving this tragic chapter its name. The term Trail of Tears evokes immense sadness, but it's vital to remember it's also a story of incredible resilience. The survivors did not simply vanish. Upon arriving in Indian territory, they faced the daunting task of rebuilding their lives and their nations from scratch in a new, unfamiliar land. They re-established their governments, schools, and communities. They preserved their language, their culture, and their identities against all odds. The spirit that led them to create a constitution and a written language was the same spirit that enabled them to endure and rebuild after an almost unimaginable catastrophe. So why is it so important to remember the Trail of Tears today? Because it challenges the romanticized narratives of American expansion. It forces us to confront the fact that the growth of the United States came at a horrific cost to its indigenous peoples. It's a stark reminder of what can happen when racial prejudice and greed are enshrined in national policy, and when the rule of law is ignored in the pursuit of power. The legacy of these policies continues to affect Native American communities to this day in issues of sovereignty, land rights, and economic inequality. By learning about the Trail of Tears, we honor the memory of the thousands who perished, and we pay respect to the enduring strength of the survivors and their descendants. It's a crucial part of the American story, a tragedy that must be unveiled, examined, and never forgotten. Thank you for joining me for this important discussion. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video and share it so that more people can learn about this history. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the past. We'll see you next time.